The sky burned red above the capital world and the clouds moved like wounded beasts. Across a dying sun, the towers of the alien dominion stood tall and cruel, their walls humming with the energy of old wars and silent judgments. The plaza below was filled with voices that did not speak. The people stood in stillness, their faces half hidden by glass masks. Reflecting the shimmer of the execution lights, they gathered to see the traitor die, though few remembered what her crime even was. Her name was Lyra, and her face was calm, as if she stood not in chains but in peace. The alien guards moved around her, their armor black as oil, their eyes glowing faintly with the cold light of machines. They read the charges in a tongue twisted by power. Crimes against the Dominion, rebellion against the Order of the Stars, theft of sacred knowledge, but none of it was true. She had only spoken words that scared them. She had told them that peace was possible, that the wars could end, that even aliens could bleed and humans could heal, and for that they called her dangerous. In the crowd, among the thousands, a boy stood, his clothes torn, his face streaked with dust, his breath shallow. He was her son, but no one knew it, for he had hidden himself among the workers watching from behind the broken gate. His name was Kale, and his eyes burned with a light the Dominion would one day fear. He did not move, he did not cry, he only stared as the machines hummed and the great beam of energy descended from the sky to the stage where his mother stood. The air trembled, the ground shivered beneath the weight of power as the energy chains lifted her. From the platform she did not scream, she only looked toward the horizon where the twin moons met above the city, her lips moving in silent words of love and farewell, and Kale knew she was looking for him. He felt her gaze, even though their eyes never met. The light grew brighter, searing against the metal of the towers. The noise swallowed the world, and when it faded nothing was left of her but the echo of her name carried on the wind. The crowd began to move again, slow mechanical steps. The guards marched away, the judges turned and disappeared into the silver halls, and Kale remained alone. In the darkening square, his hands pressed against the cold floor, his breath uneven, his heart beating too fast and too heavy. He felt the emptiness expand within him, until it became something else. Not grief, but fire, not sorrow, but rage. He looked at the place where she had stood moments before, and he felt the universe shift slightly, as if it too held its breath. That night, as the city slept under its glass sky, the boy whispered to the ashes of his mother that he would find them all, the ones who judged her, the ones who watched, the ones who cheered. He would burn their worlds and break their gods, and make the stars remember her name, Lyra, the woman they called traitor, the mother of the fire that would one day consume them all. The world did not change when Lyra was gone, but Kale did. For days he wandered the undercity where the Dominion's light could not reach, a maze of rusted tunnels, steam vents, and broken cables that whispered of forgotten wars and lost rebellions. Above him, the towers glowed with the cold light of order, but down below there was only darkness and the hum of dying machines. The air smelled of metal and smoke, the walls breathed heat, like the lungs of a buried beast. Kale did not speak to anyone. He carried only the memory of her face and the mark her death had left upon his soul. He found work among the scavengers, those who stripped the remains of old battleships for metal and circuits and sold them to the black markets. They called him the quiet one, the boy who never smiled. They did not ask where he came from, and he did not tell them. He learned to fix engines, to patch holes in ship, holes to rebuild weapons from scrap. The machines became his language, the sound of gears his heartbeat. But every time he looked into the glow of plasma or the shimmer of a reactor core, he saw her eyes reflected in the light the Dominion broadcast. Her execution across the galaxy, they said, justice had been served. They called her a symbol of peace, restored, but the truth twisted through the stars like smoke, because even far worlds began to question what justice meant if it required the death of an innocent. The whispers spread through outposts and colonies, through pilots and miners, through soldiers who had once believed and now began to doubt, and though Kale did not yet know it, the fire of his mother's death had already begun to burn across the universe. At night, Kale returned to the scrapyard where the dead ships slept. He lay beneath their shadows and dreamed of her voice. He dreamed of the stories she once told him when he was small, stories of the first stars and the dragons of the void, ancient creatures of light that lived between galaxies. She said they would wake again when humanity learned to love more than it feared, and he always laughed at that, but now her words felt heavy like prophecy. He began to build things not for others but for himself, small machines, powered by fragments of stolen energy cores. He did not know what he was making, only that he had to keep building as if creation itself could hold back the grief inside him. Then, one night, the scavenger camp was raided, the sky split open with the blue glare of Dominion. Searchlights, the soldiers, moved fast, their armor shining like ghosts. Cale ran through the maze of twisted metal, his heart pounding, his hands clutching the small device. He had built it, pulsed with light, alive, with a hum that called to something greater. He did not know why, but he felt it was important, that it must not fall into their hands. And as he fled into the endless desert of rust, he heard the voices of the soldiers echo through the night, calling for his capture, calling him by name. Cale, the son of the traitor. He did not stop running, not until the city lights vanished behind him, and the stars above began to move as if watching him from the void that waited for all things. The wind howled through the wastelands beyond the city, its voice carrying the cries of forgotten machines and the ghosts of soldiers who never returned. Cale stumbled across the dunes of rust, his body trembling, his throat raw from the dust. The twin moons hung above him, pale and cold, like the eyes of gods who had turned away. Behind him, the glow of the Dominion towers still burned, faint in the horizon, a reminder of all he had lost. Ahead stretched nothing but endless silence and the skeletons of fallen ships half buried in the sand. He walked without direction, the small device in his hand pulsing with light like a living thing. It was warm against his skin, almost breathing. He did not know what it was or what it wanted, but it filled him with a strange calm between the ache and the anger. He found a rhythm, his heart matching its pulse. The desert nights grew colder, the days burned brighter, yet he moved always forward, guided by instinct and memory of her voice whispering somewhere deep inside his mind. One evening when the suns fell behind the wreckage of an ancient dreadnought, Cale found shelter inside the remains of its hull. The metal creaked beneath, the weight of centuries' dust falling like ash around him. He sat beside the glowing device and stared at it, the way one stares at a flame. In darkness he spoke to it softly, though he knew it could not answer. He told it of his mother, of the crowd that watched, of the promise he had made in the silence after her death, as if speaking might keep her alive a little longer. Then the light changed. The hum grew louder, a pattern of symbols flickered across its surface, alien yet familiar. Cale leaned closer, his breath shallow, and the sand began to move outside. Something stirred beneath the dunes, a vibration deep and rhythmic like a heartbeat. The wreckage around him shuddered, and the air grew thick with static. He rose slowly, his hand tightening around the device, and through the cracks of the ship, he saw light rising from the sand, golden and alive. The shape was vast, impossible wings, unfolding from beneath the earth, made of energy and dust. Cale stepped out into the open, the light nearly blinding. Before him towered the form of a creature beyond imagining, a dragon forged of starlight and broken code, its eyes like dying suns. It looked at him not as a predator, but as if it knew him, as if it had been waiting for him for centuries. He could not speak, he could not run. The device in his hand pulsed once and then dissolved into particles that drifted toward the creature. Merging with its body, the ground shook, the wind roared, and he heard a voice inside his mind, ancient and echoing. The voice said, "The fire that was lost returns," and Cale felt heat surge through his veins, memories not his own flashing before his eyes, stars collapsing, wars burning, whole worlds. The dragon lowered its head, and he understood without words that something greater than vengeance had begun. He had awakened a power buried since the first war, and it had chosen him not because of who he was, but because of what he had lost. The desert burned with new light, and for the first time since her death he felt something close to purpose. The desert was no longer silent, it throbbed with power, as if the sand itself had begun to breathe. The starlit dragon hovered above Cale, its wings stretching across the horizon, shimmering with currents of gold and blue. The wind bent around it, spiraling in arcs of fire and dust. Cale stood motionless, his heart beating with the rhythm of thunder, his body shaking not from fear but from awe. He did not understand what force had risen from the ruins, but he felt its presence deep within his bones, a calling that reached beyond words, beyond time. The dragon lowered its head closer, its eyes burning like the hearts of newborn suns. Cale felt his skin prickle with heat, his mind flooded with fragments of visions. He saw the rise of the Dominion and the fall of worlds. He saw humans kneeling before alien conquerors. He saw Lyra, his mother, standing against them defiant, her voice carried across galaxies, whispering of freedom. The dragon's gaze pierced through his memories, as if reading every thought, every wound, every promise. Then the voice returned, not as sound but as light inside his mind. The voice told him that the stars remembered the blood of the innocent, that every act of mercy leaves a scar upon the void, and that his mother's death had awakened a fire older than the Dominion itself. Cale fell to his knees, the energy swirling around him, his hands pressing into the sand that burned like embers. He asked without speaking, why him, why a mechanic's son, why not one of the soldiers or prophets, and the voice answered, because only those who have nothing left can hold the power that creates everything anew. The dragon's light dimmed into a softer glow. It folded its wings and looked toward the distance where the faint lights of the Dominion shimmered. Kale followed its gaze and saw shapes moving across the horizon. Ships black as the void drones, searching the air for heat and movement. They had found him. He could hear the hum of their engines carried by the wind. The dragon turned its head again, and Kyle felt its will pressing against his own, an invitation not to hide but to fight. He rose, his body trembling, the sand lifting around him, as though pulled by invisible gravity. He reached out his hand toward the creature, and the space between them filled with light. His skin burned with symbols that etched themselves into his flesh marks. Like her name written in living flame, the dragon roared, a sound that split the clouds and sent the ships spiraling, their engines failing under the weight of the sound. The ground cracked open, revealing rivers of molten fire that coursed through the desert. Kale stood at the center, his eyes glowing with the reflection of 1,000 burning stars. The Dominion soldiers, watching from the sky, began to understand what they had unleashed. When the silence returned, the air still shimmered with heat, and Kale stood alone again, the dragon gone, its form scattered like dust across the wind, but its voice remained inside him, whispering that it would return when the time came, that the fire within him was now a seed of something far greater, and that the universe itself was waiting for him to choose whether to burn it or to save it. Kale looked toward the distant lights of the Dominion, his breath steady, his heart no longer human. The journey had begun, and the stars trembled in anticipation of his wrath. The night stretched endless around Kale, the stars above flickering like broken memories scattered. Across the void he walked, beneath them his footsteps, leaving faint trails of fire in the sand, though he did not notice. The dragon's mark still glowed faintly on his skin, whispering with the rhythm of a distant storm. The air around him shimmered with quiet energy, and every breath he took seemed to pull the desert closer, as if the world itself leaned toward him, waiting for what he would do next. He no longer felt like the boy who had knelt beneath the gallows of his mother. He felt like something else, something unbound. He reached the edge of the wasteland, where the remains of old cities lay half devoured by sand towers, tilted like broken teeth, and the bones of machines jutted from the ground, like fossils of forgotten gods. Kale searched through the ruins, scavenging what he could. He found pieces of armor still humming with Dominion energy, and twisted them into new forms with the skill his mother had taught him long ago. The night wind carried the smell of burning oil, and the faint hum of faraway engines. The Dominion never stopped hunting. He could feel their presence. Always somewhere above, watching. In the heart of the ruins he found a ship, or what was left of one. A small interceptor half buried under a mountain of wreckage, its hull cracked, but its core intact. He worked for hours, maybe days. Time no longer held meaning. He stripped metal, fused circuits, carved runes. He did not understand, yet his hands moved with certainty, guided by something beyond him. The same energy that had awakened the dragon pulsed through his veins and into the machine. When he was done, the ship's eyes flickered to life, its systems breathing again, like a sleeping creature returning to consciousness. Gale stepped inside the cockpit and for the first time felt the weight of freedom. The controls responded to his touch, as if they had been waiting for him. He took to the sky, the engines roaring, a deep metallic growl, the desert below shrinking into a sea of darkness, the stars ahead calling like open doors. He flew through the night, past the borders of Dominion patrols, past the invisible walls of fear that once chained him. He could feel the storm building behind him, the promise of fire that had yet to be unleashed. But as the void opened around him, a voice came through the static, faint but human, calling his name. It was old, rough, filled with disbelief. The voice of a soldier, one who had known his mother before the war. Kale froze, his mind flashing with fragments of forgotten faces and laughter from a time when the world still had color. He answered the call, his voice steady though his heart trembled. The soldier told him that the resistance still lived hidden among the moons of Isura, that they had never stopped believing in Lyra, that her name was still spoken as a promise. Scale set his course toward Isra, the ship slicing through the void like a blade through smoke. He did not know what awaited him, allies or ghosts, but the thought that her dream had survived filled him with something close to hope. The stars ahead grew brighter, and behind him, the Dominion's scanners flared to life, their ships rising from the void to hunt him again. The chase had begun, and with it the first spark of the storm that would one day engulf the universe in the fire of a mother's vengeance and a son's awakening. Kale descended through the thick clouds of Isra's atmosphere, the moons casting fractured silver light across jagged cliffs and the ruins of old cities abandoned long before the Dominion claimed the stars. He gripped the controls of the rebuilt interceptor, his hands steady, his heart thrumming with the pulse of the mark on his arm and the echo of the dragon's power. He could feel the resistance waiting somewhere below in the shadows, their signals faint but alive, guiding him like lanterns. In a sea of darkness, the air tasted of ozone and metal, and the wind carried the low hum of hidden enginery. Landed the ship among the ruins of a collapsed observatory, its metal skeleton reaching skyward like the fingers of a dead god. The resistance emerged from the shadows, men and women, scarred by war, their armor patched together with salvaged plates, their faces hardened but their eyes alive. Kale stepped forward, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath as recognition passed. Between them, whispers of Lyra and her son weaving through the ranks. They bowed, not in submission but in respect for the boy who had survived and returned, carrying the spark of something greater than fear. The leader of the resistance, a woman taller than most with hair like molten silver, approached Kale, her eyes sharp and unyielding. She spoke without greeting, telling him that the Dominion's fleets had discovered pockets of rebellion, and that if they did not act soon, all hope would be lost. Kale listened, the weight of responsibility settling over him heavier than any armor he had ever worn, yet the fire inside him burned steady. The promise to his mother stronger than any doubt he had known. He walked among the resistance, showing them the device that had pulsed like a heartbeat and the mark that glowed faintly on his arm. Some recognized the symbols, some felt the energy. Without understanding it, the air around them seemed to hum with anticipation. The dragon's presence still lingering in the currents of the planet, it had left a part of itself behind, a seed of power, waiting to grow. Kale understood that this was no longer just about survival. This was the beginning of the war he had been shaped to fight, and the vengeance that would rewrite the stars. As night fell, the moons rose brighter, casting cold silver light across the camp. The resistance prepared weapons, repaired ships, and whispered names of fallen comrades. Kale moved among them, teaching, guiding, and feeling the weight of every expectation pressing against him. The dragon's energy surged through him when he touched the metal. The marks burned, and the desert fire seemed to whisper through the steel of engines and hulls. He knew that soon the Dominion would arrive to crush them before the fire of hope could ignite. Then the first alarms rang through the camp. Ships emerging from the darkness, their black forms moving like shadows of death. The resistance scrambled, engines flaring, weapons charging. Kale stood at the center of it all, his eyes glowing faintly gold, the wind carrying the voice of the dragon and the memory of his mother calling him to rise. He raised his hand, the ground trembling beneath the feet of those ready to fight. The storm was coming, and he would meet it head on. The fire in his heart, a beacon for those who dared to resist. The night erupted in fire and steel as Dominion ships tore through the sky, engines blazing like fallen stars. Kale stood at the edge of the resistance encampment, his eyes glowing faintly gold, the mark on his arm pulsing in rhythm with the heartbeat of the dragon. He could feel the energy of the planet itself rising to meet the assault. The ground trembled beneath him, sand and metal shifting as though alive. The resistance fired their weapons, but against the fleet their bullets and lasers were sparks against the tide of shadow and death. Kale raised his hands, and the air itself seemed to respond, waves of heat and light rippling outward, knocking ships off course. The dragon's voice echoed in his mind, a low roaring promise of fire and vengeance. He felt the surge of power flow through every nerve, his fists clenched, and the ground beneath the first wave of Dominion soldiers erupted in molten cracks, engines exploding, metal screaming in the heat. The resistance followed his lead, throwing everything they had into the fray. Kale's mind and body became one with the storm that had begun. The fire he carried inside and the energy of the dragon above him. Ships collided, the sky lighting up with arcs of energy, debris falling to the desert like rain of metal. Kale moved faster than thought, his hands shaping energy into shields and blades, his mind remembering every lesson his mother had whispered in his ear as a child, every story of courage and defiance flowing through his veins. The Dominion soldiers faltered as if the air itself rejected their presence. He felt the hum of the dragon rise stronger, a promise that it would return, that its fire would not be contained. He leaped into the midst of the first wave, engines failing beneath him, the roar of destruction surrounding him, bullets and plasma disintegrating against his aura. The resistance following his charge, cutting through the front lines as if driven by an unseen hand. Kale could hear the voice of the dragon clearly now urging him forward, every pulse of energy shaping reality itself, his fury, not blind but precise. Each movement a strike of vengeance for his mother, every ship destroyed, every soldier thrown back, a small triumph in the face of impossible odds through the chaos. Kale saw the signal of the resistance ships moving toward the main fleet. He raised his hand again, channels of molten energy erupting from the ground, tearing through the first dominion. Landing squads, his body, a conduit of fire and light, the ground cracking beneath him, the wind swirling around him like a living storm. He could feel the universe bending slightly to the force of what he had become, the dragon's power, flowing through him unbound and unstoppable. By the time the first wave had fallen, the desert was scorched and the sky still simmered with the remnants of energy. Kale stood among the wreckage, his body trembling, his eyes still glowing gold. The resistance gathered around him, silent but alive, their faces alight with awe and fear. They had seen the birth of something they could not name but could follow. Kale looked toward the horizon, where the rest of the Dominion fleet would arrive, and he smiled faintly. The fire inside him, a promise that no one would ever take his mother's life and leave the universe unburned. The desert burned with the echoes of the first strike, and Kale moved among the wreckage, the resistance following his lead, the smell of molten metal and scorched sand filling the air. His body still pulsing with the dragon's energy. The sky above flickered with dying engines and shattered ships, yet there was no rest, only the promise of more coming. The Dominion would not forget, and neither could he. The fire inside him demanded action. He clenched his fists, feeling the weight of every life lost and every injustice done. He moved toward the central ridge, the place where the Dominion command ships hovered like black predators above the dunes, each one a fortress of armor and guns. Kale's eyes glowed brighter with the pulse of the mark, the dragon's voice roaring in his mind, urging him onward, not to strike blindly but to take the heart of the enemy. His steps left trails of fire in the sand, each footfall a warning. The resistance scattered around him, keeping the smaller ships at bay. Kale could feel the storm building beneath the ground, channels of molten energy spreading like veins across the desert floor. The first command ship fired tearing beams of light across the desert. Kale raised his hand, a shield of fire erupting from the ground, and the energy dispersed, the air around him crackling, his heartbeat matching the rhythm of the storm. He focused on the ship, its engines glowing faintly beneath the armor. He reached out, not with weapons but with power. He did not yet understand the mark on his arm flaring to life, golden symbols carving themselves into his skin, and the energy of the dragon flowing through every nerve with a roar that split the horizon. Kale unleashed the storm. The ground exploded beneath the command ship, channels of fire and light wrapping around its hull, bending metal and circuits. It tilted violently, sending smaller ships crashing into the dunes. The resistance cheered and fired again, but Kale did not stop. He leaped higher, riding the wave of energy toward the ship itself, his body a conduit of molten light and fury. Every thought focused on the Dominion and the memory of his mother. He could see the faces of the soldiers inside, terrified, their weapons useless against the storm of his will. He struck the hull with his hands, and the ship cracked like glass under the heat, the explosion lifting him higher and the resistance shielding themselves from falling debris. The desert trembled. The ground split, channels of fire snaking outward. The remaining Dominion ships hesitated. Kale's eyes burned gold, his body glowing like a star born of vengeance. The dragon's presence still inside him, urging him to finish what had begun. He did not falter, the universe waiting for him to decide if he would burn it or remake it. When the smoke cleared, the command ship was no more. The smaller vessels scattered into the void or plummeting into the dunes. The resistance gathered around Kale, looking at him with awe and fear. The desert still smoldering beneath their feet, the energy fading slowly, leaving trails of light on the sand. He stood among the ruins of the first battle, his heart still pounding, the dragon's roar lingering inside him, a promise of more to come, and the fire of his mother's vengeance rising to meet the coming war. The horizon was alive with fire and smoke. Kale stood atop the highest dune, his eyes glowing gold, the mark on his arm pulsing in rhythm with the energy of the dragon inside him. The resistance gathered behind him, their weapons ready, their faces a mixture of awe and fear. The Dominion fleet had regrouped far above their black shapes, blotting out stars, engines humming like the drums of war. Kale took a deep breath, the air thick with the scent of burning metal and sand, and felt the weight of all that had led him here, every memory, Every loss, every promise to his mother coalescing into a single purpose. He leaped from the dune, into the night, the desert wind, ripping past him, his body a conduit for the dragon's power, energy flowing from his veins, into the sand, into the air, into the very world around him. The ground beneath the fleet trembled, the ships firing blindly, the beams of their weapons scattering. Against the storm he carried with him, Kale's hands moved through the currents of fire, shaping them into blades. Shields, walls of molten energy that deflected their attacks and cut swaths through their formation. The resistance followed his lead, striking with precision and fury inspired by the storm, their hearts and minds bound to the boy who had become more than human. The dragon's presence flared around him, wings of starlight erupting in his mind, guiding his movements. Kale felt visions of the Dominion's greatest commanders, their faces twisted in shock and rage. He struck at them not with weapons, but with the force of the storm. Every strike a memory of his mother, every pulse a promise of vengeance. The ships around them faltered, engines failing, holes melting under the intensity of energy that seemed to rewrite the rules of the universe. The desert below cracked open, rivers of molten light surging toward the horizon. Kale's body lifted higher through the void, his fists glowing with raw fire. He carved paths through the fleet, each movement precise, deadly, unstoppable. He could hear the dragon's voice roaring in his mind, urging him onward, telling him that the fire would consume everything, but from destruction came creation. And he understood for the first time he was not just a vessel of vengeance, he was a herald of balance. The Dominion's arrogance would be their undoing, and the universe would remember the name of Lyra and the sun who bore her fire. The command ship erupted in a storm of energy, metal twisting and flames licking the void around it. Smaller ships scattered like frightened birds. The resistance cheered, but Kale did not pause. He descended upon the remaining forces, his body a comet of light, the ground burning beneath him, the winds screaming, the sky bending to the energy that he wielded. He struck each target with precision, each strike leaving trails of molten power. The fleet disintegrated into shards and smoke. The horizon cleared, leaving only the stars and the glow of desert fire beneath his feet. When the last Dominion vessel fell, Kale stood alone atop the dunes, the resistance gathering around him. Silent yet alive, the dragon's presence fading but still whispering promise of more to come. The desert hummed with the echo of power, and the universe itself seemed to tremble. Kale looked to the stars and whispered her name, Lyra, and the fire inside him burned brighter than ever. The universe had felt vengeance, and it had been delivered, and in that moment Kale knew that nothing would ever be the same again.